Hi, I'm Steve Casely from CBT Nuggets, and welcome to this nugget on configuration management. Configuration management is our last of our 8 Prince2 themes, and configuration management is all about ensuring that we're tracking everything the project produces, whether it is a formal document, whether it's a piece of code, or whether it's a working paper. Configuration management will define the appropriate storage and management processes for all of the project artifacts to ensure that we can retrieve the artifacts at a moment's notice, and to ensure that we're retrieving the appropriate, i.e. the most current or the desired artifact. As just described, configuration management is ensuring that we manage and track all project work. And the work can be code, the work can be formal deliverables, i.e. documents, or the work can simply be working papers. But with appropriate configuration and management in place, we're managing and tracking the code. We have a configuration management tool, a code repository tool, and we're managing the code, and we're doing branches and tags, so we have effective code management in place. We may or may not keep our deliverables in the same configuration management repository. I find we often will use a different management repository for code than for deliverables. But again, we have established processes for tracking all of our formal deliverables, our documents, and ensuring that we are tracking changes and that we're getting approval on our documents. And finally, maybe a surprise to you, I hope not, we have to have appropriate configuration management in place for our working papers, so that as we need to go back, as a team member needs to go back, as a fellow team member needs to get access to a working paper, we have, again, a shared repository. Going to be far less formal management of our working papers, but we still need to have the policies and procedures that working papers are going to be stored in a shared repository on a network drive or in a document sharing tool like a SharePoint, so that anyone can get access to any paper, whether or not they were the original author, and whether or not the original author is at their desk and has their PC fired up, so that that working paper stored on the hard drive, shouldn't be stored on a hard drive, should be stored in our common repository. So what does Prince2 say we need to do for configuration management? There are 5 key steps. We need to plan. We need to define the processes for how we're going to do configuration management for code, which may be very different than our configuration management for our formal deliverables, our documents, and certainly I would expect will be very different than our configuration management for our working papers. But we need to define and document our configuration management strategies, and then we need to identify all of the configurable items, the CI items, the configurable items, all of the code configurable items, and all of the deliverable configurable items. I would suggest we won't be identifying configurable items for working papers because they're ad hoc and dynamic and come and go as the project progresses. And then we need to follow the plan. Whatever the plan said we need to do for managing our code, managing our deliverables, we will have the appropriate control steps in place for doing that, tracking the status of our configurable items, and then finally we will report on them so that we're able to tell senior management that this formal deliverable is in development stage versus this formal deliverable is in peer review stage versus this formal deliverable has been presented and accepted and is now at release 2.0, and so on. And finally, often a dirty word in a lot of vocabulary is, I believe we need to have formal audits in place on our configuration management processes, so to ensure that we are effectively managing and tracking all of the CI items on our project. So what do we do in plan? Well, effectively, we are going to plan or define our configuration management strategy, and we will produce a CM plan or strategy, which will be a formal document, which we will present and get approval from our project board, get approval from our business that this is the CM strategy or the CM plan, and this will in fact become the first document artifact. that we will follow our configuration management processes against. The degree of configuration management on your project required, again, is going to depend on the type and nature of your project. Is this a project to develop a playground for the neighborhood children, or is this a project to develop a new inventory management piece of software? And different projects will have a different strategy, but I would suggest all projects will need some degree of identification for our configuration management strategy. And in it, as previously discussed, we're going to define our strategy for code artifacts. Do we have existing code that we're going to be modifying? How are we going to take a baseline of the existing code? How are we going to generate branches? How are we going to generate tags? And I may be getting into some very specific terminology, very specific to particular configuration management, code management software packages, but we will absolutely need to define our strategy for doing configuration management of code artifacts. Similarly, but probably a very different configuration management strategy, is how are we going to manage our document artifacts? How are we going to do version management? When does a document go to 1.0 state, i.e. original approved sign-off state? What is the determination of sub-versions, a 1.1 versus a 1.1.1? When do we go to a 2.0? All of these considerations are going to be built into our configuration plan/strategy for all of our document artifacts. And do we need a specific configuration management strategy for other CM assets? And by these other CM assets, I don't mean working papers, because besides documenting that we will store all of our working papers in a common online accessible repository, there probably will be very little else in terms of CM strategy for working papers, but I would suggest there will be other CM assets besides true code and besides true documents. There will be other CM assets, and one that I'm dealing with on a project right now is configuration settings files. So if I'm installing a piece of middleware and there are install screed or install shields, and these install shields are going to ask me a series of questions. To me, the way I answer, or the questions that I answer in that install shield, is a CM asset that needs to be appropriately managed. Maybe I have other C configuration files that instead of running through an install shield, I simply provide these configuration files to the middleware. So I believe, especially on a software project, we're going to have a number of other CM assets, and we absolutely need to have a strategy for how we're going to do appropriate CM management for those. And as they say on a project I'm on right now, I have a bunch of application administrators who seem to be resistant to document the policies that they're following when they're running through install shields. Oh, we know what we're doing. Don't worry about us. We do this all of the time. You don't need to track that. We never make mistakes. Well, there's famous last words in and of itself, isn't it? We never make mistakes. So again, pay some consideration for how you're going to do CM management for every artifact on your project, whether it is more formal recognized code and document or other CM assets that you need to work through. And what are going to be your retention policies? How long? How many versions? And again, it's going to apply for code. How many branches? What's the strategy for branches? How often do you expect your developers to check their code into the code repository? And so on. So how long do you need to keep it? There may be some legal and audit characteristics that you need to. You may have your own specific project requirements for versioning and branching and so on. And already discussed is what tools are you going to use. And again, I would suggest it's definitely a plural tools. My experience is we're going to use a different tool for managing code than for managing formal deliverables, then potentially for our working papers, and how do we do configuration management for things like install shields. Do we use a screen scraping tool and expect our application administrators to take a snapshot of every screen on every install script that they go through? And what are the tools that's going to be appropriate for doing that? But if we develop a well thought out plan, document in advance, get approval and acceptance that this is the right way to go, and then present the plan to our team, we're well on the way to an effective configuration strategy for our project. So with the CM plan established, our next step is identify. Identify all of the CI items, configuration items, everything it is that the project is going to produce. And without repeating myself an awful lot, it's all of the code, it's all of the documents, it's all of those other CI items that the project needs to produce, needs to be identified up front. And we produce a CI list. So in advance, in the calm and quiet of planning, we're going to produce our CI list. And the CI list is say, I'm going to produce, and I'm going to keep this very simple and very high level. I'm going to produce an analysis document. I'm going to produce a design document. I'm going to produce 200 pieces of code. And again, very high level. It needs to be more granular than that. You're going to probably define your code components by the function and subfunction. And we're going to produce 15 configuration items for install shields. And so on and so on and so on. But the key is in identify, we do this up front. We produce the CI list. And the CI list is going to be formal. It's going to be published. And we're going to use that in just a moment to track all of our configuration items. Has the analysis document been started? What is its current status? It's in development. Has the, and again I'm jumping ahead of myself, has the design document, what's the current status of that? It is in version 1.2, it's under development, it's in peer review, and so on, so that through the CI list, we can very quickly and effectively identify what's the current status of every CI item on the project. The other aspect to the CI list is, do we have a baseline configuration? Do we have existing docs that are going to be input to the project? Do we have existing code that's going to be input to the project? That's all part of our baseline configuration, and our CM plan is going to identify our policies for modifying the existing docs, for modifying the existing code. Are we going to take an existing doc that is at a 1.0 and modify it and make it a 2.0, or are we going to create a new doc? And how are we going to deal with code? Are we going to produce branches? And how are we going to support my project's development branch versus the maintenance branch versus the middle of the night emergency fix branches? So we're going to develop all of our strategies for how we're going to manage our baseline and how we're going to manage all of our independent CI items that are going to be worked on throughout the project. And the key is, it's all project products. The code, the deliverables, the other CI items. And the exception is, and although I have it on the list, the exception is the working papers. And to me, the working papers, as is previously discussed, is the rules and the processes for working papers. No matter what it is your team member is producing, it may be their own notes after doing an interview. It may be their mock-up of a program design. It may be drafts for the unit test plan. It may be anything and everything that the team member is working on. I don't want any of this on a local drive. I want all of this on a shared drive that's got two purposes. It's accessible and it's backed up. And that's my key reason of why I feel I need to have very formal expectations put onto my team for how they're going to deal with their working documents, so that if they take vacation, if they're sick for a day, or if their hard drive on their local PC crashes, I have access to all of their working papers and nothing is going to be lost. Identification, it puts the plan into action, where we begin to create our CI list that we're going to use to track all project deliverables and know their status. Our next CM step is control. And that's actually jumping the gun a little bit, because the next CM step is really the team producing the CI item. But that's not part of Prince2, that's part of project execution. So we're going to skip over this very, very important aspect of configuration management, is the team doing it, and we'll focus on what Prince2 says for configuration management, which is control. And effectively, control is at the project, or as I just suggested, at the project management level, and that's to ensure that all work is under CM. Basically, that the team follows the CM plan. And you may remember back to the last step that we have in CM, which is audit, and how is control, where I'm validating that the team is following the CM plan, is different than audit. Audit is at the project level, where I, the PM, is going to directly influence that my team is following the CM plan, where the audit is someone external to the project, or it's certainly someone who has a dotted line to my project board, is going in and literally validating that I, the project manager, am ensuring that the control steps are taking place. So it's really a two-level control over CM. But it's ensuring that all of the work is following the CM plan, that the team is doing appropriate product versioning. When do we take our document to a 1.0, present for approval? What is the rules for when we go from a 1.0 to a 2.0, and what are the rules for 1.1 and 1.1.1 and 1.1.2 to ensure that we have the appropriate traceback processes in place, so that we can document the changes, so that we can understand what nuances have happened in our documents as the documents have gone through routine, standard project progression and routine project elaboration of additional details into our deliverables. Equally important, but probably more based on code than on deliverables, is the whole process of how do we back out and restore. Team member has been working on a piece of code for X hours, X days, hopefully not X weeks. Hopefully you don't have any piece of code that's going to take weeks worth of effort, but the team member has been working on it for a period of time. What are the processes for backing out and restoring to revert the code back to a previous state? And we may want to revert code back to a previous state because A, the team member just realized they went down a wrong path, and it's easier to start over fresh than to try to undo their changes. Or we may need to back out and restore because tests are failing, and we simply, again, discovered that this code is bad. Or we need to back out and restore because a CR, or change request, has happened and the requirement has been removed. How do we ensure effective backout and restoration processes are not going to impact in an adverse way any other CI item that's going to be on our project? And discussed already, probably very specific to tools we use for configuration management at a code level, is making sure that our team members are following the appropriate processes for branching their code and maintaining tags so that we can again track the changes. Why has a piece of code changed? The code changed because it was the first time, i.e., we did the development. Why did it change again? Because we had a unit test failed. Why did it change again? Because we had a CR processed. Why did it change again? Because we had system test failed. There should be no changes, whether it is to a formal deliverable or whether it is to a piece of code, unless we have a documented, authorized, approved reason for change. Now, having said that, it may take us 5 days to write a piece of code, or it may take us 5 days to update chapter 3 in a doc. I would expect my team member is going to check that document, that piece of code, back into the repository on a nightly basis, because again, my policy is no code on local drives, and that includes at end of night when you go home, so you're going to check it back in. But that's still part of this change. It took me 5 days to update the document to include the request from the new change. Or it took me 5 days to change the piece of code. And that's fine. That is 5 days worth of work approved by a CR. Or that's 5 days work, hopefully not as a result of a unit test case failing. But again, we need to have very formal processes in place to track and control all changes, that every CI item, every configuration item needs to have change history. And that's what control is all about. Our next step is relatively straightforward, at least I believe it's relatively straightforward. I hope you agree with me. But we need to do regular CM reports. Remember that CI list? It had every CI item on it. We had the analysis document, we had the design document, we had the code, we had the configuration items. We need to track the owner, the status, and the dates for every CI item, and we need to report on that to our project acceptor, to our project board, so that we can instantly tell the project board that the analysis document is at release 1.1, it's in development, and it's due to be released on such and such a date. And that's what CM reporting is all about, is tracking and maintaining our CI list. And the next report we should be producing out of configuration management is the build report. So we are ready to make a code build. And this is where we get the tracking of the changes. So we had our baseline. That was build 5 from a month ago. And what's changed since build 5? We have 2 CRs, we have 6 changes from unit test, and we have 7 changes from system test. And we have to be able to authorize and match everything from our CM system as to how we're tracking change, and everything from our code repository. Effectively, there should be no code in the code repository that varies from our project baseline of build 5 of 1 month ago that can't be tied to, and I'm going to simply call it a defect or a CR. But there should be no code changes. There should be no middle of the night programmer just felt they had a better way to do this, or programmer was bored and wanted to go in and embellish and emboss a piece of code. The baseline was build 5 from a month ago. As we do build 6, which is our build report, all changes should be as a result of known defects that have been resolved and checked back into the repository, or CRs for incremental changes. And our final step is the audit. Audit, as I said, is external to the project, or CM audit can sometimes be done internal to the project, but it is done on a report to the project board more so than a report to myself, the project manager. Effectively, the CM audit is the validation, as you can see by my validate, my validate, my validate, my validate, but the CM audit is the validation that the team and myself are following the process. Because as awesome or as critical as CM management is for project success, it's also very easy to overlook the details of effective CM management and end up with code that's in a build that wasn't an authorized change, or end up with changes to a document that's not going through the approval process, or worse still, have ineffective code management in place and that we have multiple versions of the same piece of code going on. So the audit is all important to do the validation that we're following the CM plan and processes. And what are we validating? We're validating the record keeping, that the CI log, the CI list, is current, and that everybody is maintaining the list, so that we are doing effective reporting on our CI items. We're validating the repositories, that everything is in the repository. All code is in our versioning software. All documents are in our SharePoint environment if we use SharePoint. All working papers are stored into a shared directory. Nothing is stored on the local drive. And we're validating that the change history, that all change is approved. And as I said just a moment ago, the approval can be an actual CR, or the approval is a defect. And the defect can come from the developer themselves as they develop unit test issues. The defect can come from the system test team. The defect can come from the business team in terms of customer acceptance testing. But all changes have to be approved either through CRs or through the defect process. And we're validating acceptance, that the deliverables are reviewed and approved. Audit is ensuring that we're doing exactly what it is that we said that we're doing, and that all of the CI items are at the right release level, the right branch, and following established processes. And this concludes our nugget on configuration management, where there were 5 key steps. We plan the CM process. We establish the rules and the procedures to be followed by the team. And then we identify all of the CI items, config, items, and we create a CI list. And then we use the CI list in the next step, which is the control, where we track the status. And then effectively, in our next step, we report against the CI list so that we can track and report on the status, on the CI status. And we produce those all-important build reports to document exactly what is going into the current build. And finally, we have the all-important audit to ensure that we have an external, unbiased assessment that we are in fact doing the things that we promised, that we said we were going to do in our CI plan. This concludes our nugget on the Configuration Management Prince2 theme. In fact, this concludes our series of 8 nuggets on the 8 Prince2 themes. I hope these modules have been informative for you, and thank you very much for viewing.